in fact, and in certain cases up until the 60s, was in discrimination in housing, in schools, in work, quotas. I know I attended a Jewish school, and I know when my cohort of students in the late 60s, when we were applying to colleges, we knew if we wanted to get into one of the elite colleges that we had to be better than other applicants because we were coming from a Jewish school, and that there was a quota, and once that quota was filled, you wouldn't get in, and if to get on that quota list, to get on that list of people accepted, you had to be far better than the student coming from someplace else who was not a Jewish. What are some of the characteristics? Many of these things, without the quotas and the discrimination, are still part of the new anti-Semitism. But what are some of the characteristics of what we call this new anti-Semitism? It's far more likely today to be secular than to be religious, certainly in Europe. It is far more likely to come from the left than from the right. And when I'm talking left and right, I'm talking extreme fringes. It tends to be global. It's quite sophisticated. It's not sort of the crude kind of anti-Semitism you used to see, and it has the ability to be quite toxic. It emerges from civil, not religious society by and large, and it is far less directed at the individual Jew, and far more directed at the communal Jew, whether in the form of the State of Israel or in the form of the Jewish community. And at times it can be quite lethal, and that is why in many parts of the Jewish community, but not only the Jewish community, there's this great concern about Iran. Because certainly there you have, and it's not just President Ahmadinejad, but it is infused throughout aspects of many parts of that society, and certainly the leadership of that society, when you have a state calling for the destruction of another state. It can start a chain reaction against individual Jews, but it starts with a attack on Jews as a community, and of course, it is very much focused on the State of Israel. Now, I want to add a caveat here. I don't, in any manner, shape, or form, and I would rail against this, say that someone who is critical of the policies of the State of Israel, who is critical of Israel's behavior, etc., is ipso facto anti-Semitic. That's ludicrous. If you want to read criticism of the State of Israel, if you want to read criticism of Israeli policies, I would suggest you go every day to Haaretz, Israel's leading newspaper, or Ma'ariv, its other leading newspaper, and read the columnists there, and you will find vibrant criticism of the policies of the state. Not only criticism, but you certainly will find extensive criticism. You'll find it in a way you won't find it in any other country in the Middle East, this freedom to debate and to criticize. So I'm not talking about criticism. I'm talking about an obsession with the behavior of Israel, an obsession that may often defines itself as Israel can do nothing right, that its existence is, its right to exist is questionable. Its description of Israel as a colonial state, the failure to recognize that 25% of the Israeli population actually comes from countries in the Middle East, from Arab and Muslim countries, Jews from Arab and Muslim countries, people who were expelled from those countries in the late 40s after the establishment of the State of Israel. But it's denial of legitimacy of the State of Israel. It's not, absolutely not denial or criticism of the policies of the State of Israel, and that's a very important distinction. It is calling for, you see it coming often from the Arab Muslim world, calls for state-sanctioned genocide, whether we see it from Iran or we see it from Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda. At one point, you had outrageous statements by the Hezbollah leader. If all the Jews were gathered in Israel, it would be easier to kill them all at the same time. So calling for all the Jews to come to Israel, not to build a Jewish state, but to make them easier for destruction. We find it on campuses. And that's why I was so touched by this invitation to come here and talk about this topic on the campus, because many campuses shy away from addressing it. The default position often on a campus is a hostility towards Israel. And again, not a criticism. That's perfectly all right. That's again, what you'll find if you look at any aspect of Israeli society. But a feeling that if you are a supporter of Israel, somehow you are an opponent of a common humanity, and an opponent of a multicultural society. There's been an attempt on many campuses to link Israel to an apartheid a nation, and of course calling for boycott. In the United Kingdom, there were calls from academics for academic boycott of all Israeli scholars. And when it was pointed out that this was crazy, in part, some people said this is crazy because you have your most active criticism in Israel of the policies of the State of Israel amongst academics. So the people calling for the boycott said, so in other words, if we called for a boycott of all Israeli academics, we'd be boycotting those who are critical of the policies of the government. They said that is problematic. So the solution they came up with is, if you're an Israeli academic, we will allow you to come, even though we're calling, the boycott never was, the plan was never passed by the academic associations which were calling for it, but we'll let you come if before you come, before you make your academic presentation, you avow that you are opposed to the policies of the State of Israel. So you can imagine this as someone who's an expert in medieval art. Before they can start talking about, Romanesque or whatever churches and medieval art, they have to stand up and say, I am an opponent of the State of Israel. Now, let us return to the 11th century. It is mind-boggling that these came from supposedly smart people. You see it often in the UN from diplomats from a variety of countries. We saw it now, thank God this is a regime that is of the past, but one of the regimes that was most active in this kind of discussion was, of course, the late but not lamented Libyan government. Libya's ambassador to the United States accused Israel of genocide and compared Gaza to Nazi concentration camps. Now, again, a caveat here. You may totally disagree with Israel's policies vis-a-vis the Palestinians. Absolutely. As I say again, there are many, many Jews who do and many, many Israelis who do, who feel that Israel's policies are misguided, are not constructive, will not produce a definitive solution. But to talk about it in terms of genocide is to be so far over the top that it's ludicrous, because it's anything but a genocide. It may be disturbing, it may be difficult, but a genocide it certainly is not. Yet Libya's, the former government of Libya's permanent UN representative said exactly that. And at that point, when that statement was made, Libya was holding the presidency of the Security Council for that month. So that you get these kind of statements that are made, these kind of accusations that are made, often with very little opposition, often with very little criticism. You have it in more, I wouldn't say oblique, but semi-benign, benign is really the wrong way, but I have friends in London, I have friends in Belgium, who counsel their children when they go out in the street not to wear a kippah, if that is their custom, but if they want to walk with their head covered, wear a baseball cap, wear a hat. Don't go in a kippah. Don't wear anything that will overtly show that you are Jewish. I know tour groups that go sponsored by the Jewish community, sponsored by a Jewish tour organization, maybe that's going to go to certain countries in Europe where they will visit sites of Jewish interest. And they used to give people, little bags or T-shirts or hats that would say, Jewish Heritage Tour or something like that. And now they won't do that. They won't do that. They will say heritage tour, but they won't say Jewish heritage tour, only because of their fear. In 2008, on the Hungarian National Day, Hungary's national, sort of like our July 4th, the Jewish community president of the Hungarian Jewish community counseled Jews to stay home for their own safety. So it's something very disturbing here that's happening both on a global political level, but something happening both on an individual level. What about Holocaust denial? Well, I have chosen in my work, and it's become pretty much the accepted norm, to divide Holocaust denial into two different types of Holocaust denial: hardcore and softcore. The kind I confronted in the courtroom when I was sued for libel by David Irving, then the world's leading Holocaust denier, sued for libel for calling him a Holocaust denier, and this was in the British courts, and if you know anything about British law, which I don't necessarily expect you to, the libel in Britain is the charge of libel, and the way you defend the way it plays out in court is the mirror image of the way it is in American courts. In America, if I say you libeled me or you slandered me by what you wrote or what you said about me, I, who say I was libeled, have to prove that you did that. You, as the author of the words, can sit there and wait till I prove it or don't prove it. In Britain, it's the mirror image. If I say you libeled me by what you wrote about me, you, as the author of the words, have to prove the truth of what you said. So the burden of proof is on the person who has written the statement, the person who has said the words, given the speech. Consequently, when David Irving came and sued me for libel, for writing about him briefly, just a few lines, in my book on Holocaust denial, calling him a Holocaust denier, arguing that Holocaust denial was a form of anti-Semitism, and ipso facto, he was an anti-Semite. When he came to sue me, I could have chosen to ignore it, but had I done so, he would have won by default, because I had to prove the truth of what I said. Had he won by default, a number of things would have happened. He could then have said, the court would have found that he was libeled by me because I didn't fight the charge, therefore agreeing that it was a correct charge. And he could then say, Deborah Lipstadt was found guilty of libeling me by calling me a Holocaust denier. Ipso facto, I, David Irving, am not a Holocaust denier, and my version, David Irving's version of the Holocaust, is a genuine version, which is that there were no gas chambers, there was no final solution, there weren't 6 million Jews who died. This was all made up by the Jews to win the sympathy of the world. That's what I call hardcore denial. I fought it. We fought it, by the way, not by proving that the Holocaust happened. What we did was, and by fighting David Irving, we're essentially fighting all hardcore denials, these people who argue that the Holocaust didn't happen and the gas chambers never happened, etc. We did something, we used historians. It was really a triumph of history in the courtroom. We used professors of history as our witnesses, and we asked each of them, we divided up Irving's work into different sections, and we asked them to follow the footnotes. Follow the footnotes back to the sources. And when David Irving, and his arguments are picked up by old deniers, including Ahmadinejad and others, when David Irving says, I have a document which proves that the gas chambers would have exploded, a scientific study which proves that the gas chambers would have exploded, so consequently there could never be gas chambers. If you go back and look at the document, it doesn't say anything of the sort. Or if it says something of the sort, and you look at the science behind it, you realize it's junk science. Or he might say, I have a document which proves, a Nazi document, which proves that only, his words, 68,000 Jews died, not were murdered, died at Auschwitz, not the over 1 million that Jews claim. Well, when you go and look at the document, and you trace it back, and you see what it is, and you look at the original document that he's saying proves his point, you see that it doesn't prove that at all. That it's simply a book of a portion of the Jews who were at Auschwitz who were registered when they came into the camp. And acknowledging that those Jews who came to the camp and were sent directly to the gas chambers were never registered. You only registered if you weren't sent to the gas chambers. So it doesn't prove that at all. And we prove that over and over and over again. We gave the court 35 different examples. I think it was 35, maybe even more than that, of where his documentation doesn't prove the facts. So we weren't proving what happened, but we were proving what deniers say happened did not happen. We were pulling the ground out from under his arguments. That is hardcore denial. We won a resounding victory with the judge calling David Irving's version of the Holocaust version of history fanciful, a lie, a novel, completely fabricated, calling him an anti-Semite, a racist as well. We showed the court how he was a racist, and dismissing his arguments totally out of hand. That's hardcore denial. What is the other form of denial, which is much more prevalent today than hardcore denial, in part because of what was accomplished through my trial of proving that these arguments have no credence? Today, denial takes what we might say a soft-core form. What's soft-core denial? Well, people who say, why do we hear so much about the Holocaust, or enough about the Holocaust? Why are Jews always talking about the Holocaust? First of all, they're always talking about it because not so long ago, 1 out of every 3 Jews was killed. They're talking about it because most of the world stood by and did nothing. They're talking about it because it was an attempt to destroy the Jewish people. They're also talking about it because it should be a warning sign to our world about the dangers of standing silently by when genocide takes place. I don't think, people sometimes say after the Holocaust, never again. The fact of the matter is, in the 65 years since the end of the Holocaust, it's been again and again and again and again. Whether you look at Rwanda, whether you look at the Congo, whether you look at Cambodia, you see mass murders and often bordering, if not actually genocide, taking place repeatedly. We hear comments like something I mentioned earlier, which is a form of soft-core denial, the genocide of the Palestinians, Israel's genocide of the Palestinians. Again, you can disagree with Israel's policies, but to call it a genocide, which is a mass destruction of people, is a way over statement, and something that I think misconstrues the reality. What we're seeing this in so many different forms, and we're seeing it in a way that has become very disturbing to not only Jews, but all those who are concerned about prejudice and hatred. And I think one of the most important things to remember, and I want to close shortly so we have time for conversation and for question, is that one of the things that anti-Semitism teaches us, and anti-Semitism is the oldest, longest form of prejudicial hatred that we have in the world, goes back thousands of years, that it starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. Had the Germans won World War II, had the Nazis won World War II, they would not have stopped with the destruction of the Jews, but they would have killed many of the peoples of Eastern Europe, of what we call, with no disrespect meant, the stands, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. They would have killed many of those people. They would have finished murdering the gypsies. They would have killed many Soviet peoples because they were consumers of food that the Germans wanted for themselves. They had wiped out a good part of the Polish intellectual class. They would have finished with that. Anybody in Poland who could have provided leadership